This is Talkish. I am Halli Casser-Jayne. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show is always available online at hallicasserjayne.com. Now, let's get to it. On episode 314, my guest is New York Times internationally best-selling author of Those Who Save Us, Jenna Blum, here to launch her new book, which doesn't officially drop until June 5th, The Lost Family. Holocaust fiction is tough to write, and there are few who write it better than Jenna Blum. Stay tuned for an intimate conversation and some surprises when I speak with Jenna Blum. I'm trying to remember how I first met Jenna Blum. I can't, but it was probably on Facebook, where we share a lot of the same friends. The first time Jenna was my guest on the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, we talked about her international New York Times bestseller, Those Who Save Us, a book I still consider, these many years later, one of the best World War II historical fiction novels I have ever read. So that when her next book, The Storm Chasers, arrived at my doorstep, I couldn't wait to read it. And I was happy that I wasn't disappointed. And Jenna was my guest on the show once more. Then Jenna, who I think has been my guest as much as any one writer, came back for a visit with some of her fellow writers from her next foray into historical fiction with her novella, The Lucky One, a part of the literary collection Grand Central. That was some conversation, a bevy of women writers talking a lot about a lot of interesting things. I implore you to go back into the Halli Casser-Jayne Show archives and have a listen to that podcast. But that was then, and this is now. And now I again welcome Miss Jenna Blum back to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show to talk about her new book, officially released June 5th, The Lost Family. Jenna, one of Oprah Winfrey's top 30 women writers, is also the 2005 winner of the Ribalow Prize, awarded by Hadassah Magazine and adjudged by the late Elie Wiesel. Based in Boston, where she has long taught fiction and master novel workshops at the famed Grub Street Writers since the school's founding in 1997, Jenna earned her M.A. in creative writing from Boston University, where she taught creative writing and journalism and was a fiction editor for AGNI Literary Magazine. From 1993 to 1997, Jenna interviewed Holocaust survivors for the Steven Spielberg Survivors of the Shoah Visual History Foundation, an interview done back then, from which Jenna's latest book of historical fiction, The Lost Family, derives, a book in which I can tell you Jenna Blum, once again, expertly plays with her readers' hearts, minds, and their souls in a brilliantly rendered tour de force that takes us from World War II Berlin through the go-go 1980s, a family saga you won't forget. Let's talk with the author of the new book, The Lost Family, Jenna Blum. I love this book. But
now.
I love this book.
Oh, thank you so much. You're the first person I talked to about it, actually.
Well, I'm going to tell you something. I was a wreck when I was.
Good. I aspire to.
Right. So I'm not going to tell you everything that I said in the introduction yet. All right.
Okay.
I'll save that because I will go through the interview, and then you'll have to wait to see what I wrote.
Oh, that's so exciting, I think.
So anyway, let's start with the story of the Lost Family. Jenna, first of all, how wonderful to have you here. Let me just say that.
Thank you.
You know, like we're sisters. How long have we been doing this together?
Oh, God. Seriously, like 15 years, right?
It's bizarre. It's just bizarre. And I'm happy to be a part of all of it. I was so looking forward to reading The Lost Family. But let's start with the story of the Lost Family. At the heart of the story is a Holocaust survivor, the dashing owner and head chef of a renowned Manhattan restaurant, Masha's, named after his first wife lost in World War II. Peter Raskin is his name, your character. I'm going to let you take it from there. Just give us a brief synopsis, because I am going to go through some of the story because I think it's brilliant how you put this together, and I want to talk to you about Jenna, the writer. So give us the brief story.
Fabulous. Thank you. I'll give you my elevator pitch, which is The Lost Family is about a German-Jewish concentration camp survivor named Peter Raskin, who emigrates to the United States and, against his better instincts, starts a new family, but finds that he and his new wife and daughter are all haunted and affected by the family he lost during the war.
Thus, The Lost Family. Where'd you come up with this one?
Well, The Lost Family was very loosely inspired by a Holocaust survivor. I had the great privilege of interviewing for the Steven Spielberg Survivors of the Shoah Foundation back in the 90s when I was working for the foundation. This survivor had been a chef in his native country. He survived Theresienstadt and Auschwitz, and then once he emigrated to the States, he was fired from his job as a busboy because his concentration camp had too upset the American diners. And I started thinking about that next chapter of the survivor's life, the emigration. We often focus on the wartime atrocities, as we should, because they should never be forgotten. But I think that very little emphasis has been placed on how difficult it was for survivors to come to a new country, not knowing the language, having lost everything and everybody, and having to start all over again. So I wondered what that chapter would be like. And I started thinking about the survivor's new family, what kind of emotional obstacles they would encounter because of the survivor's experiences, how his post-traumatic stress would translate into his behavior, and how they would react in their own lives as a result of not being able to really connect with their loved one who was shut down by the trauma he endured.
You always seem to find the twist. That's what I love about you.
Thank you. I am twisted.
I happen to know that's only partially true. but you do find that, and that's always fantastic to me because I like to pick up something that is different, that tells a different story than we're accustomed to getting. But here's the deal, Jenna. We're going to explore that twisted plot line and the characters in a moment. But before we do, I want to talk about Jenna, my good friend Jenna Blum. Yeah, it's my contention that good writers, and to me that means a few things, share three basic qualities. They're great storytellers. Check, that's Jenna. Great writers, which is different from storytelling. Check, that's you. And in some ways, more importantly, they must have great heart. And that, of course, is you. You have all three. That's why you're always on the show.
How kind. Thank you.
And that's the magic, right? When you can find people who have those three ingredients, I think that's the key to the plot. But there have to be other ingredients. So I ask you about that heart of yours. And to get there, you need to give us a little background on who is Jenna Blum. Where'd you come from? Where'd the passion Jenna so brilliantly conveys in her books come to us? I know it from your vivid posts on Facebook, but talk to me a little bit about your childhood, because I think your childhood is a lot about who you are as the writer.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think writers tend to reheat their leftovers is not quite right, but we all tend to become obsessed with one theme, and my theme is often about people who are overcoming and surviving trauma and how they rebuild their lives in the aftermath. So that has been the heart of all of my novels, which is really a bit strange because I grew up in bucolic Montclair, New Jersey, which is this lovely green suburb of Manhattan. And it's featured in The Lost Family as Glenwood. I gave it a different name. It's not really a very effective disguise. But I am the daughter of a newsman. My dad was a news writer for CBS, and he wrote for Walter Cronkite and for Dan Rather in their heyday, in the network's heyday. And my mom was a concert pianist who relinquished her career when she got pregnant with me and they moved to the suburbs. So The Lost Family, a lot of it is a nod to it's more than a nod, it's an homage to my family. My dad was very much like Peter, who is essentially a gentle soul in a very tough world. And my mom faced a lot of the dilemmas that Peter's wife, June, faces in the book. She was very ambitious, very talented, and then found herself in the suburbs with a husband and a child, which was the last place she had intended to be. And she was also caught in that sort of revolving door of history between being raised to be a wife and a mom, but then coming to New York in 1969 in real life, when feminism, the second wave, was just peaking. So the conflict between being a wife and mom and being an ambitious creative was very pronounced for her, and I borrowed heavily from that for June. And then in the novel, of course, there's Elsbeth, the daughter, who may or may not be me, who is a delightful hot mess. I mean, to me, she was so much fun to write, and she shared my determination as a teenager and as an adult for sort of like mouth-breathingly pursuing whatever it is she wants, even if she's looking for love in all the wrong places.
But I want to go back to your father was Jewish, right? And your mother was not?
Yep.
Yeah, and so that gave you a quite a vision, so you could do both sides of the story, which are very important to the story. That's why I go back to, who you are as a child or who you are as the writer, and your own personality and your own world and your own life plays out in what you create. I want to digress again. This is personal. The launch of your baby, and that's what The Lost Family is. So every book is. It's bittersweet. You and I, we're going to talk. You just lost your mom. I know how close you were. So tell me how she fit into the formulation of Miss Jenna Blum, the creative, and all that you are. A brilliant writer, a brilliant photographer, guys. She's a terrific cook, too.
Thank you. I don't dance, but I can do all the things on good days. There are a lot of days of mediocrity, but that's, sort of par for the course.
There's no mediocrity in your life. Don't give me that crap.
There is, but you only see the tip of Hemingway's iceberg, right?
Oh, right. Right.
Water, you guys get the glamorous 10%, or the part that's actually going right. So my mom, her name is Franny, and she was, as I said, and she was an immigrant from Minnesota, like June Bouquet and The Lost Family, and she came to New York on a Juilliard scholarship to become a concert pianist. And then she met my dad, who is this very dashing newsman who was older than she was, very glamorous, Jewish, and she was not Jewish, so my grandparents called her the Shiksa. And she married into this culture that she revered but didn't really quite understand. And then once she found herself in the suburbs with a child, I think it was a big conflict for her, at least with me, her first child. By the time my siblings came along, I think she had adjusted a bit more to the sort of lovely, country club life of suburban New Jersey. But I had received from her the message when I was a child that to give up one's career for one's family was really difficult. And so I had formed the subconscious vow that I was going to have a career before a family. And so now I have, thank God, this amazing career for which I'm grateful every day. And I hustle. I don't have weekends. I don't have holidays. I write 24/7 when I'm working, and then I promote 24/7 when I'm not writing. But I also have put my family on hold, except I have a fantastic fiance, and we have a black lab, Woodrow, who's 13 now. And then I have my book babies. So that's how my mom fit into the puzzle of me and the puzzle of the book. She was very proud of the novel. She read a galley of it in the week before she passed. Oh. She had a very aggressive form of breast cancer, and she was very involved in the writing of my two previous books, but this book, The Lost Family, was so close to my own family that I was terrified to let her read it. And she kept saying, when am I going to see the book? When am I going to see the book? And I kept saying, soon, soon. But when it became apparent that there was no soon and that her time was almost up, my publisher, HarperCollins, FedExed her a galley, and so she read it in that last week. And when she was done, she said, it's a fine book, and you should be proud. And so I was very grateful to have her blessing on it before she crossed the river.
Oh, my God, I'm crying. Dear,
in a little bit too. Sorry. But it was very emotional for me.
The thing about it is that I understood that writing Masha, who was Peter's first wife, who was the Shiksa, and then writing June, I knowing as much as I do about you and all of this, I think that the two best characters really so brilliantly fleshed out, both of them, and very much your mom.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad to hear you say that. I think because Peter is first in the book and the reader is first invited into his head and his emotional conundrum, many readers bond with Peter, and then June comes along, and June is a little tough, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like she's like, a little arousing of some envy, but I really feel for June, and I also really feel for Elspeth. With June's predicament seems to me to be universal to women in general, that often there does seem to be this choice between motherhood and family and profession and career, and I know many of my friends wrestle in this very admirable daily way with having both a family and a career, but they are tired all the freaking time, So made June a sort of figurehead for this. And I'm really, really glad you like her. She doesn't make great choices, but she has very good intentions.
I had sympathy for her. I remember my mother once saying, and my mother was older than your mother, the generation before, and my mom said to me, we were sitting around with all of her friends, and they were having a drink, a martini at lunch in those days, and I remember them saying, right? Remember that? And my mother said, they said, if you had it to do over again, what would you have done? And each of them went around the table and said, I would have done whatever. And my mother said, I would never have had children.
Oh my gosh. Did you hear this?
Of course. I was sitting right there. And the interesting part about it was, as you know my life, in my head, I took that as you must go out and you must prove to the world that a woman can do, can do what they need to do and not be encumbered. So I related to June's frustration in one way. Yeah. On the other hand, I thought she was selfish. But.
I think, she is selfish. June, and I probably am doing a bit of a spoiler here, but June is wooed by her younger tennis coach, and she gives into that woo. And I think she's just so lonely in her marriage to Peter, who is emotionally locked down because of his trauma. She really, really tries to reach him, and I think she genuinely loves him, but their marriage is a bit of a mismatch. So in her frustration at not being able to achieve the life that she hoped to achieve, she decides to strike out sort of sideways and go off in a different direction. And I think, people are imperfect. I was talking earlier today with somebody about how things are perfectly imperfect. And June, again, has really good intentions like everybody in this novel, but her actions don't always match her intentions. And that's part of what gives life its juice and its conflict.
And it brings me to this. Peter, the Holocaust survivor, riddled by this ghost of his lost family, the wife and the two children, the twins, he's weak in many ways, but he's a victim. He's a good man. So I ask you this, did you like him when you were writing it? And is this a fair question to ask a writer? Do you have to like your characters that you create? Do you have to get out of the judgment when you're writing them?
I actually don't have any judgment for any of my characters, even the horrible ones who I know are horrible. And in fact, the horrible characters and the sort of messiest characters are the most fun for me to write because they do things I would not allow myself as a person to do in real life. So I kind of do my virtual reality through them, my living vicariously. But Peter, I had great empathy for Peter as I have for all of the characters. I think that expecting people in general, across the board, in real life and virtually and in books, to behave in a always healthy, always upright fashion is really unrealistic. And people are a confluence of their characters and their circumstance. So Peter is somebody who is sort of a gentle soul. He's like Ferdinand the Bull. He only wants to smell the flowers, except that translates for him into cooking in his kitchen. And that's all he wants, is to be a cook. He wants to be a chef. He wants to be left alone. The war comes along, scoops him off his feet, tips him into the abyss, and he comes out the other side terribly scathed. And that determines the rest of the course of his life. So who's to say how we would react in similar circumstances? When I was interviewing survivors, you could tell that some of them were super strong personalities and some of them were gentler personalities. There really was no rhyme or reason as to how personality helped them survive or didn't. There was a big element of luck to the whole undertaking. But I think that Peter, because he is sort of a gentle soul, is not somebody who, when he comes out of a conflagration, is going to be able to reach out and connect with other people. It's just not in his character. So he's really a lovely, lovely man, but he's just so damaged, and he just shuts down.
Yeah. I have great sympathy for him, needless to say, and then I wanted to shake him at other times. But I understood. I mean, how could you not understand? Peter and June's daughter, you brought her up, Elizabeth, Elie, raised in the shadow of Peter's first family, killed in the Holocaust, as I've mentioned, Masha and Elizabeth's half-sisters, the twins. So much of your story is an exploration on the long-term effects of the Holocaust and generations of families, some Jewish, some not. But I'd like to talk to you about that for a moment. 'Cause I have a contention here. Listen to that. I've interviewed a lot of Holocaust survivors too. Know many personally in my family. It's my contention and there may be science to back it up. I've talked to survivors about this, that the horror survivors lived and witnessed literally changed their DNA.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
And the DNA, therefore, to the children and the grandchildren, morphs too. And I don't know if it gets less as the generations go on, more. My friends who have parents and grandparents of Holocaust survivors are still affected by it. Mm-hmm. Your thoughts?
I was waiting for a contention, but there's no contention. I agree completely. In fact, while I was writing the whole book, but especially Peter and Elsbeth, because they have the physical connection of him having been through the Holocaust and her being his daughter, I was doing a lot of research on post-traumatic stress disorder and then how it's passed down from generation to generation. And while I was working on Elsbeth's section, there was a New York Times article about a study that had just come out from Harvard about how the children of trauma survivors, of extreme trauma survivors, have different cortisol levels from the children of people who have not suffered trauma, that in fact, children of survivors and trauma survivors literally have different chemical makeups and different responses to trauma. So Elsbeth has what we would call high arousal when she encounters something that's upsetting. She's super upset about it, and she seeks self-soothing, which is for her in the form of food. Immediately, she doesn't have the greatest coping mechanisms. She was raised by parents in the 70s and 80s who are sort of the parental model of benign neglect because they're involved with their own issues and their own problems. And so she inherits Peter's trauma in a very real physical way and then doesn't have the coping tools to rectify her behavior.
Kid fascinates me. Is she you?
She is me and she's not me in the same way that all the characters are me and not me. I know that sounds like a total cop-out answer.
No, it's fair.
There's a lot of me in Elsbeth. I actually really bonded with my earlier self writing her because I was sort of an awkward kid and I was a chubby kid. I had an eating disorder, which was almost like de rigueur in the 80s. In fact, one of my friends, when she read early drafts of the novel, was like, I feel so left out because I was never bulimic or anorexic in the 80s. And, it's probably too late. I'm like, yeah, you don't actually want to do that. But I grew up in suburban New Jersey and eating disorders were a thing. And Elsbeth, with her friends in the novel are basically my friends from high school. So it was really fun to throw a nod to them. Where Elsbeth and I depart is that Elsbeth in the book develops a fascination with a photographer named Julian who has become the taste of New York for his photographs of naked preteens and teenagers. And Elsbeth sets her cap for him and she decides she wants Julian and nothing is going to stand in her way. My determination at Elsbeth's age was to become a writer and nothing was going to stand in the way of me becoming a writer. And Elsbeth's target is simply a little different. And she chooses this poor guy who has no idea that she has a bead on him.
Well, growing up in suburban New Jersey in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, I can tell you, yeah, I understand the eating disorder. Brilliantly portrayed. Survivor's guilt. Should we just spend a moment on that? Because
Absolutely.
It's an extraordinary thing, survivor's guilt. And it comes in many forms from each person has their own way of whatever. You want to embellish on that a little bit in the context of the story?
Yes, thank you. There actually was a piece from the Patriot Ledger, which did a review of The Lost Family in the context of survivor's guilt. The author of the review, her name is Dr. Nancy Harris, and she's a psychologist. So she actually taught me more than I even knew about survivor's guilt in this article, which is on my website. Survivor's guilt is a very torturous and peculiar phenomenon that makes people who have survived trauma believe that they should not have survived, and in fact that the people who were killed should have survived in their stead. So they torment themselves with this belief forever, and unless they get help for it, unless they get medical and psychological help for it, it really shapes their behavior. They can either shut down completely, as Peter does, because his trauma is compounded by his guilt that he has not been able to save his first family. Or sometimes people who are tormented by survivor's guilt spend the rest of their lives trying to find ways to give back and pay it forward, as it were. So, for instance, the gentleman who founded the Holocaust Memorial in Boston, Steve Ross was a Holocaust survivor, and he has spent the rest of his life feeling guilty and trying to compensate for that guilt. So it can either be a crippler or a motivator.
Yeah, and I think that's an important point to make. Portraying an ethnic group, in this case, Jews, Uncle Sol and Tante Ruth.
You just love them? I just love them. I love
absolutely
them.
Adore them and you recognize them, right?
Right.
I'm Jewish. In the case of non-Jews, as of June and the Shiksa, June the June Bouquet, I love that name, the Shiksa, Peter marries. How dicey is it for a writer so that your characters don't become caricatures? Because I think the world relates to the caricature of a Jew or a Shiksa or a, whatever. Is that a dicey place to play?
Well, caricatures are easy, right? That's why people relate to them easily, but they're also like the fast food of writing. You ingest a caricature and then you forget about it like an hour later and you're hungry again. What I'm trying to do is to be honest about people in my writing and to portray them in all of their complexity, whether they are the leading players like June, Peter, and Elspeth, or the best supporting actors like Sol and Ruth. So Sol and Ruth are Peter's cousins in Westchester who sponsor him after he emigrates to America, and he stays with them in their wealthy and lovely Westchester enclave. They're very much based on my grandparents, my dad's parents. So I was giving them a hat tip in the book. And I was really trying to be honest about who they were. My grandfather, who was a Madison Avenue lawyer, was the son of a plumber on the Lower East Side, pulled himself up by his bootstraps, was enormously successful, collected art, was a great philanthropist, and often in private was very bullying to his family, especially when he was drinking his Crown Royale, which also made it into the book, and his Cutty Sark. And I always thought that was so interesting. And here was a man who every time he looked at me cried with adoration. He'd be like, "Oh, Buffalo, you're so beautiful," and whatever. But also he could be really mean to my dad, especially when he was in his cups. So I always wanted to explore that complexity. And my grandmother, who is Ruth in the novel, was this lovely lady who very much lived in my grandfather's shadow. She was very cultured. She was a wonderful cook. She was a wonderful home decorator, just a very gracious woman. And I always wondered what that was like for her to sort of play the helpmeet to a man of giant character. With Sol, I also wanted to develop him into what my agent and I were calling the kosher Nostra. And Sol is a little bit of a Jewish gangster. He is fundraising to give money to Israel to buy arms so that Israel can defend itself against its enemies. And that was yet another layer to Sol, that he is really in the business of saving people. He helped get people out of Germany during the war. And yet why in his personal life is he sometimes a tyrant? So hopefully in shading in all of these layers from my characters, which are, basically that's how people are in real life, right? I've avoided the caricature. And yet June, as somebody coming in from a very different culture, from small town Minnesota where there are no Jews, comes in armed only with the things that she has overheard from her mom and from the people in her small town. All Jews have money, all Jews have maids, they're all wealthy, they all help each other, they're all privileged, they argue all the time, they use their hands when they talk. These are the things that I heard growing up from people who are not Jewish. So that actually was a little painful for me to write because I didn't want to look at that part of my mom's culture and say, there was a lot of anti-Semitism there, but there was. It could be gentle or it could be blunt, but it was there, and that hurt.
Absolutely. I totally relate to that. There's that caricature, whether you like it or you don't. We all come across it all the time. But I think it works the other way, too. It's just not so bad.
It totally does. My grandparents used to call my mom the Shiksa, and Peter, like my dad, had a thing for Shiksas. Like my dad's first wife in real life was a model from the South, and then he met my mom, who is also just as Shiksa as they come. So, for my grandparents to call my mom a Shiksa didn't exactly make her feel that welcome in the family. So, yes, the stereotyping works always, caricaturing works always, and that's why, I think it's best avoided because it's too easy and it's often cruel.
You were listening to the Halli Casser-Jayne Show. My guest today is New York Times and international best-selling author Jenna Blum, the author of The Lost Family. The Halli Casser-Jayne Show posts new podcasts Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern at hallicasserjayne.com and is available wherever you listen to your podcasts. Be sure to find me on Spotify and on your Alexa device. So I have to take you down a side path. The Mapplethorpe type character.
Oh.
Elspeth falls for this.
Julian. Oh, Julian. Yeah.
I want to understand why you brought that in. What was the point of her doing what she did? And I'll let you handle how much of it you want to reveal or don't reveal, but in the context of the conversation, I was fascinated by that. That went by the way, that went to a place that I'm not used to your going. It was a little edgier than Jenna usually goes.
That's interesting. Well, I think after my first book, Those Who Save Us, which was like saturated with sort of X-rated scenes that I still got lambasted for on Amazon. But this is different because there's a teenager involved. Right. And Elspeth actually, as I said a little earlier in our conversation, she becomes infatuated with one of her grandfather's projects, if you will. Saul sponsors artists, up-and-coming artists, and he collects their art. And one of them is this young man in his 20s named Julian Wilton, who is a guy with a very troubled past. He's a foster kid. He's been abused by just about everybody he's met along the way. And yet he's phenomenally talented, and he comes to New York riding his talent, like Elspeth's mom, June, does. And his happens to be photography, and he shoots children. He takes portraits of naked children. In my mind, the reason that Julian does this, and he actually says this, is that compared to his childhood, which is basically a horror show, he likes to shoot children when they're unclothed because they're just happy and they're pure and their bodies are unscarred, unlike his, which bears many scars. So he thinks he's giving the world portraits of joy and purity, and of course other people are like, you're basically a pornographer. Elspeth, who is in desperate need of love from her own family, who's not receiving it, who's a total daddy's girl, whose daddy is shut down to her, who loves her but is unable to really communicate well with her, has a lot of love to give, and her love shoots out in the wrong direction. And when Julian often offers to shoot her as a subject, she develops this enormous crush on him and decides that she's going to capture him and she's going to be his love and his wife forever, which is, of course, ridiculous because she's 15, but at 15, we all do these ridiculous things. So that was why I brought Julian in, to personify the plot of this lonely young woman who is falling short of the family she knows her father has lost, is falling short compared to her glamorous model mother, is not able to reach either parent, and who is looking for somewhere to put this great love and heart that she has. And so she decides to give it to the wrong guy. So I'm sure that sounds familiar to many of us.
You think?
Not me, of course.
Never did that. So listen to, yeah, right. Let me take this one. There's very little in World War II with this book. Fascinating. It focuses on the 60s, 70s, and 80s hippies and the mod look and Twiggy and the club. How much fun did you have with that? Because I had fun reading it, by the way.
Oh, I'm so glad. Thank you so much. I've been very grateful, so astoundingly grateful to some of the early reviews that say some of the fun of reading this book and the lusciousness of it is the period details for all of these very glamorous decades. And I actually had not thought about writing World War II over and over again because I don't want to keep returning to the same subject matter. And then I realized that in our new political climate, I probably should keep writing about World War II and its effects because some people don't seem to remember that it actually happened and how devastating it was. So I'm going to keep working with that theme.
Good.
But I don't want to write the same story over and over. So I did give the reader in The Lost Family some of Peter's history and some scenes from his personal war, which are, of course, hellish. But what I really wanted to do was to explore the diaspora of the family and the diaspora of the experience into the America of the 60s and the 70s and the 80s. So I had a really good time writing those eras. For each era in my study, I had an image board. So when I was writing the 60s, my walls were papered with images from the 1960s of like Twiggy, as you mentioned, and the Russian tea room, and every restaurant I could find, and the outfits, and the clothes, and the hairstyles. I listened to all the music. You know, I'm a method researcher, so this is what I do. And I also, for Peter's section, which features his beloved restaurant, Masha's, I created literally, like on software, but also with food, his menus for his restaurant, which took me a whole summer of reading chef memoirs and cookbooks and fusing German Jewish comfort food with 1965 era food, which meant that it was brown and like saturated with whiskey, but also had like a sort of Peter twist to it that meant that it was also fresh and yummy. So I cooked all those recipes, tested them on my fiance. We all gained a lot of weight. We had to walk a lot. And then for June, I switched up the image board, and I had all 1970s images for her. And while I was writing her character, since she doesn't eat anything, I basically dressed like her. I had these bell bottoms and a T-shirt that said feminist and a bandana. I didn't wear a bra for like 3 months. My fiance greatly appreciated. And for Elspeth, I switched again and had an image board from the 80s. But since I basically lived Elspeth's story, I didn't have to do quite as much quote-unquote research. So I just plucked all the details from my childhood, everything from, the Madonna mesh gloves and wearing a net stocking in your hair to everything they would have eaten and the music. So, and I was trying to give the reader that sort of virtual reality experience of walking into these characters' worlds and really inhabiting them, what they would see, hear, taste, smell, and touch, without it being a sort of inside joke. Like sometimes I'll see writers do this. There's a lot of mention of like music or whatever that can make the reader feel like I'm at a party and I don't understand really what's happening. Like, so I was trying to make it a very all-inclusive, totally immersive experience.
And it worked. It totally worked. And it was so much fun, that part of it, I have to say. I used to envision myself as Twiggy. I was like, I think when I got married the first time, I weighed like 75 pounds, and all I was eyes.
What did you wear?
A very, very, very beautiful gown my mom had made, kind of thing. But I was bone thin. I mean, New Jersey.
Right? New Jersey, 80s. We were all like really thin, but we compensated with this really great hair.
Right. Oh, my God. Hair everywhere. Huge. I loved it. It was fantastic. It was so much fun. I can't even begin to tell you. And Masha's is a restaurant I want to go to. Somebody ought to open Masha's.
Honestly, when we were doing the auction for this book, one of the editors said, I'm not sure that my house would get behind this book 100%, but I love it, and I really want to eat at the restaurant. And I was like, honey, if you want to eat at the restaurant, you got to buy the book.
It would be fun to do it.
Give readers a sort of a taste of Masha's by, when I do my book events this summer, I am going to cook the appetizers from Masha's and bring them to the events. And also there's this fantastic thing going on right now. I'm really honored by this. Online Book Club Cookbook, which is a website that devotes itself to book clubs and books that have food themes, is running something called the Lost Family Virtual Supper Club. And all of these food bloggers have received a copy of the novel, and they are creating recipes based on the novel's menu, and then they're posting them online so that you can see the actual recipes and you can make the food from the book and look at these luscious photos. And I just am so amazed by the sort of velveteen rabbit act of this, right? Like I dreamed up something in my head, I created these menus, and all of a sudden out there in the world, there's this food, this actual food that people are eating and enjoying because of something that I thought of. So that it's just sort of extraordinary to me.
Jenna, you're a great writer, but you're one of the best marketers I know as well, I have to tell you. It's true. I applaud you. I tell you that all the time. So The Lost Family, it's an emotional minefield. All your books are.
Thank you.
So are you running on all cylinders while you're writing heart, mind, soul, while at the same time you're in another universe observing, guiding, and censoring the characters? I mean, where is Jenna while she's writing all of this? Give us a sense of the perspective that you're using when you're writing.
That's a great question. As are all of these questions, and I'm so enjoying talking about this, I am completely immersed when I'm writing, and I really don't leave the house very much. Like, honestly, people are like, oh, you still have to eat. I'm like, I eat standing up over the sink, and then I go back to work. Like, I wear the same pair of yoga pants for, months on end when I'm working. I really try to get into the character's mind and skin as much as possible, and the fewer interruptions, the better. And I'm very emotionally invested in all of the characters. So whenever I finish writing a section from a character's point of view, I have a little tiny bit of postpartum. And when I finish the draft of the book, there's a big postpartum there because I really miss that emotional involvement. And I am, of course, really tired and have to lie low and go shopping for a week after that. And then comes revising, so you get to relive it all over again. But for many of the scenes for The Lost Family, I literally cried while I was writing them, and then I cried when I was rewriting them. So the whole book is sort of stained with salt.
So how is it to live with you while you're going through this process?
Oh, I don't know. I could ask Jim, my guy.
I want to know, Jim. What's it like?
Honestly, yeah, I should ask him to come in here. If you want me to.
Yeah, I'd love to talk to him.
Oh, really? Okay. Hey, Jim. He's like, I'm not even paying attention to you.
I'm dying to talk to him anyway.
Got him to come in. Yeah, he's got some interesting.
Is he coming in, or is he shying away?
I will go get him, but I can probably answer for him. I think he is being respectful and trying to stay out of my face.
Stay out of your face. How are you?
Okay,
is he there?
We have a question for you.
Hi, Jim. It's Halli. How are you, kiddo? Good. So my question is, what is it like to be around her when she's going through this crazy process of writing and creating?
I find it joyful.
Joyful? Really? How come?
Yeah. Well, it's I'm a creative as well, and I appreciate the innovativeness and spontaneity of creativity. So she's unpredictable, but sorry, somebody else. If you're looking for regularity or stability, that sometimes can be challenged. But it's you do write on a regular basis.
I do write on a regular basis.
She's very disciplined, and thankfully, since I have some sense of what's going on, I don't knock on her door and say, "Hey, would you like a bowl of soup?" When she's writing. So I try not to interrupt her, but it's always fun because we're walking through the house and you never know when she's going to say, "Hey, what do you think about this?" And I like that.
You like that? Well, I think you like more than like. I think you love her.
Oh, I love her. I thought you were asking me about her work. Yeah.
Well, I think they're the same in a way, aren't they?
And yeah, they do tend to crisscross. So the laughter that we have, the exchange of creative ideas and talks of politics and what's next and all these different things it's rarely a dull moment.
Jim, I was going to ask her if she could have written this before she found you, Mr. Jim Reed. Great photographer, folks. The love of her life. Could she have written this book before she met Jim? Could you have?
I don't know. I mean, honestly, when we were talking about what my process was like before, I'm carrying the device away from Jim now because he's actually working. Sorry.
Thank you, Jim.
Nice talking with you.
Nice talking with you, kiddo.
Thank you. So I just inflict all my creative stuff on him, whatever he's doing. He's very tolerant and very helpful. When we were talking about my process before, I mentioned how immersed I get when I'm working on a novel, and I had never written a book while I was living with another human being before I met Jim. The first novel I wrote, Those Who Save Us, I wrote late at night while I was living on my own and teaching at Boston University. And my second book, I actually ran away from home to write in a motel because I couldn't stand to be around people. So being with my love and having the idea for this book start to bloom in me was concerning to me because I thought, I don't know if I can do this. Like, I've never written a book in a house with another person. And Jim, being a fellow creative, was so helpful and so wonderful. Every morning at breakfast, I would talk to him in total non sequiturs. Like while I was making turkey bacon, I'd say, "Oh my gosh, you're not going to believe what Julian is going to do in this scene today," or "What do you think about, Peter treating June in this particular way?" And Jim would have very little idea of what I was talking about, but he would listen to me patiently, ideate the scenes. And then he would help me enforce my own discipline. So if I was feeling lazy and saying, "Oh, I want to go to TJ Maxx before I write today," or "I think I need to bake a bread or a baguette like at Masha's," or he would say, "It's your schedule, you choose, but I am not talking to you until you write your scene for the day." And then he would go up to his studio and shut the door, and he would not talk to me until I was done. So I had his wholehearted support, and I think because he does do a lot of creative work, his understanding of how consuming it is when you're working on something creative, the hours just vaporize. And he was super respectful and not, as he pointed out, knocking on my study door and saying, "Hey, honey, what are you doing?" Like, "What do you think I'm doing?" So I felt very secure that he understood the way this works, and I'm so grateful
That's so cool. That's so wonderful.
Thank you.
Which leaves you how you write the end. Are you sated? I know you mentioned a little bit. I want to go into a little bit more in depth. Are you sated? Are you purged? Are you relieved? Are you angry? Are you sad? Are you matured?
Yes, all of the above. No, I'm kidding. Probably never matured, honestly. But
I don't believe it.
There's a great relief in writing the end because I have committed the whole story to paper. So if something, God forbid, happens to me, the characters are intact. And then they can live on. Somebody can get them published, and other people will know them. So it's always really unnerving to me to be mid-book. If something happens to me, the characters can't get out and have readers meet them. But it also is, as I said, a postpartum feeling because you've been living with this world and with these people for so long. It's kind of like when you're reading the end of a book you really love and you start rationing the pages, like you can see that you're getting toward the end and you think, oh, I just don't want to leave these people. So it's very much a push-pull. I want to get them down so that they're safe. And at the same time, I don't want to leave them. The end is very fraught.
It's a hell of an ending on this book. That's all I'm going to say.
Thank you.
A hell of an ending. Really. Yeah. Killed me.
You.
Do you write for your readers, for yourself, or for your characters?
Yes. Honestly, I write for the characters first because the characters to me are real people who exist in the ether up there above our heads, and it's my responsibility to channel them down onto paper as accurately as I can, which harkens a bit to what we were speaking about before, that I don't want them to be caricatures, I want them to be real people, and my job is to get them down on paper so that other people can know these people too. So my first responsibility is always to the character. My second responsibility is then to the reader to make sure in later drafts that my characters are understandable. They don't have to be necessarily likable. I know you want to strangle them most of the time, but hey, this novel is about family, right? And these are the people you most want to strangle, the people you least understand, and the people you fiercely love the most no matter what they do and how exasperating they are. So if you want to strangle my characters and you love them, then I've done my job with this. But it is my job in the revision stages of a book to make sure that you, the reader, have all the information you need so that the characters are as understandable as they may be maddening and as lovable as they may be maddening.
Listen, kiddo, I know launching a new book is like birthing a baby. You've said it.
Yeah.
I know how sad it must be that your mom couldn't make it to see the baby birthed.
Thank you.
You know I just lost my mom, too. But Jenna, if I may, as your friend, I know that she's sitting up there, and I'm pointing to heaven right now, and I'm saying right this very minute, she is so damn proud of you.
Oh, thank you. Oh,
I am. The Lost Family is a must read. It's Jenna Blum, the woman, Jenna Blum, the writer, at her most brilliant. Thanks, Jenna.
Oh, Halli, thank you so, so much. You know I just adore you and your listeners. Thank you for having me.
My pleasure, darling. I've been speaking with Jenna Blum, the New York Times and international best-selling author of multiple books, including Those Who Save Us. Her latest is The Lost Family, available June 5th at fine bookstores everywhere and on Amazon.com. Jenna's website is jennablum.com. Find her on Facebook and Twitter. She's well worth the follow. Thank you so much for tuning in to Talkish with Halli Casser-Jayne, the Halli Casser-Jayne Show, a production of RESEC LLC. Be sure to tune in to Talkish Wednesdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, when new podcasts are posted at HalliCasserJayne.com and on all your favorite apps. We are open 24/7. So, until next time, when we meet again, this is Halli Casser-Jayne.